All right, thank you everybody for joining this month's Brinc Webinar Series. It's our third version of this. We're trying to do these monthly webinars to help founders navigate the hurdles of entrepreneurship. So this month, Jordan has volunteered to provide a webinar on the don'ts of engaging with corporate partners. So I'm going to leave it over to you, Jordan.
Thanks, Andrew. Hopefully we've got the audio working right now. So my presentation today, I wanted to make sure that I was trying to give some actionable advice. A lot of times especially in the world of startups, you hear a lot of aphorisms around, oh, do your homework and things like that. And of course, these are all sort of obvious things, but there are mistakes I've made that I hope that I can help all of you make. So I'm going to try and take a bit of a tongue-in-cheek approach here. And obviously, if you have questions, please ask them in the chat and we'll go from there. But firstly, I have to give a shout to my colleague, Alex Eds. Alex is in the UK. His title in the UK is Director of Innovation for JLL. And I'll drop a link to his original article that definitely inspired this. So I'll drop a link in the chat and I'll ask the Brinc team to put it in the description for YouTube. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the little bell if you're one of those social media masochists. But anyway, today, the don'ts of engaging corporate partners. Well, what do I know? As you can see from the headshot here, I have a very nice bespoke suit that not only is it a bespoke suit, it's in JLL's corporate colors. So deservingly so, many of my friends don't just think I'm kind of corporate, but I'm the most corporate out there. And to some degree, that's true. But if I'm being honest, I'm not that ashamed of it. I enjoy a lot of the aspects of what my job is, and I enjoy what I'm able to learn from it day to day. But hopefully through the course of this conversation, you'll see that a healthy balance can be struck between the seemingly diametrically opposed worlds of corporates and startups. So for me, I promise I won't, this won't be a huge about Jordan, but I do want to make sure you kind of understand my perspective and where all of this advice is born from. I spent 10 years working in e-commerce. Right out of high school, I worked for the Gap in their direct-to-consumer logistics. And at its peak, Gap employed 135,000 people. So already 10 years of working with just a massive corporation. I spent another 10 years working in various management consulting roles for a range of multinationals like Shiseido, JP Morgan, even Indonesia's largest telecom. And some of that work has been part of what I did at joining JLL, where I currently have 90,000 colleagues worldwide, and 42,000 of them are here in the Asia Pacific region. On top of that, I also have an MBA, so just all the recipe for a great corporate stooge. But on the other side of that, I'm not just here to lecture from on high from a corporate stance. Here's all the ways that you bug me, blah blah blah. I do have some empathy for what it's like to have a startup and to try to push the boundaries of an industry. In my spare time, I work as a creative director for Hong Kong's only dedicated cider brewery called Neonotic, and I'm a partner in a local craft beer brewery called Black Kite. I really do understand your struggles. I know that because I know you're all desperately trying to figure out how to spell Neonotic right now so that you can Google it, despite the fact that we've been around for about 2.5 years. So really, I do understand what it's like to try and sort of scrape for attention. And there's right and wrong ways to do that. I'm also fortunate enough to be surrounded by some incredibly talented people, including the founders of the Hong Kong Wall Street Art Festival, where I work with them to help find corporate sponsors and partners to support the festival, as well as connecting artists with potential corporate clients. The photo here isn't just a particularly flattering one of me. It's actually the artwork in the JLL Hong Kong office. That was one of the HK Walls artists that we hired to then come paint a mural in our space. So it's really it's particularly special to me. But beyond my work with Brinc, I also directly advise a number of startups around the region on a whole range of challenges like fundraising, market penetration, and a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today to avoid the mistakes that I've already experienced through my career. But another fun fact, I also got ordained online to officiate my sister's wedding. And then last year, my sister, as a gift, bought me a 1 square foot plot of land in Scotland so that I can have the official title of Lord. So what should you know then? You should know that you can address me as Lord, Reverend, Jordan, Michael, Kostelac, MBA. But that you absolutely should never do that. At a large corporate, anyone who might be worth talking to will not take themselves too seriously. I'm lucky enough that within JLL, I actually work for the Asia CEO's office. And while everyone I work with is an extremely busy person, they are simply that. They're people. And they are really easy to talk to. They aren't always the most accessible, but anyone who's sort of trying to treat you like you should genuflect to what they're doing, they're not going to be helpful to you. They might have some clout in the organization, but it's very unlikely that they're going to be willing to help you. And so it should be like any other relationship. It should be an immediate turnoff if someone seems to take themselves too seriously. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that in the title trap section of this presentation. So while Alex's article that I mentioned earlier is especially directed towards PropTech startups, I'm going to take a more generalist view to how you should engage large corporates. And I've already told you about my experience, but I thought even after that incredible picture of me in a suit that proves I'm so corporate, the best way to prove that I'm corporate is to subject you to a PowerPoint presentation with a bunch of bad stock photography. So that's how I'm going to talk you through all of this today, and I hope that it's enough to keep your attention. So what we're going to talk about today, first thing, you are the worst. The number one sin that everyone makes when trying to engage large corporates or people in positions like mine. And then we'll go on to KYC. For those of you who don't know, that means to know your customer. It's not just a term for fintech, for how to structure and a role that fintech has to play, but I think it's really important to the B2B relationships that you're trying to establish as startups. I'll also talk about the title trap, about how titles can mean everything and nothing at the same time, and how you should sort of sharpen your critical thinking skills around those, especially when navigating platforms like LinkedIn. I'm going to throw in a few pro tips, and then hopefully you'll have a bunch of questions for me that I can answer with some actionable ways of going about what's next. So now that I've already told you that I've had the holy orders and that I am an ordained minister, I want to start by sharing the deadliest of sins, and probably the most common that I get when startups or really any provider sort of has when they're engaging JLL as a large entity or people in roles like mine where we're trying to help them navigate the organization. So the first bit of advice I have is don't be a person who leaves babies on doorsteps. So I'm going to talk about two really bad examples of this. It's an old trope from like television shows, right? Like you remember from cartoons, they're like, leave the baby, and it's some sort of like, I don't know. Apparently it used to happen a lot, but a lot of people do this to me and to people in senior positions in large corporates. So I want to talk about what does the first one of that look like. This is an actual message that I received on LinkedIn. So this is Exhibit A, and this is what external versions of leaving the baby on the doorstep looks like. Now you can see here, they've already, like, if you could look into my LinkedIn messages, you would see hundreds of messages just like this. And I don't mind the spelling mistakes. You can't work across Asia and get pissy about imperfections of language, right? This is probably this person's second or third language. So when you're in a position like mine, you have to be sensitive to that. But what you also expect is a certain degree of attention to detail. And the first little bit, the two hashtags on either side of my name, I didn't put those in there. It's very clear that they just use those as placeholders in a boilerplate email. So already the very first impression they've left with me is, hey, you're one more person on a list that I'm firing this off to, right? And probably not just me within JLL. There's probably hundreds, if not dozens, if not hundreds of my colleagues who this is being blasted out to. This particular example, I've redacted everything that could sort of let you know who this is. But to make matters worse, they left a 37-page document and just said, here, read this. And that's why I use this picture here. That's the digital equivalent to just dropping a pile of papers on my desk and saying, come back to me when you figure out how you can do business with me, right? It's a very lazy approach. And it's not really respectful of what I just told you. People in senior positions in companies, they're very busy. They're not willfully trying to ignore you, but don't give them more work. You need to be willing to serve up your product and think about how they want to hear that. They did that. They said, hey, here's for your reading. Get back to me when you can. And spoiler alert, I never did. And that's a lot of these conversations go exactly that way. Exhibit B actually comes from within my company. Exhibit B, I'll leave you to it. This is an actual email. This slide took me the least amount of time to put together today because I knew exactly what I was going to do. I went into my Outlook. I typed in the name of this exact colleague because almost all their emails are constructed with this degree of detail that you see on your screen. And I've picked who's worst at committing this particular sin and use this as an example. Hi, both. Please meet with this person who heads a venture fund and blank in HK. I wish you a good conversation. Best, your incredibly helpful colleague. So you're probably asking, okay, so your colleague's committing this sin. How is this a don't for me? Well, it's a don't for you as a startup because don't expect that to ever lead to anything. Honestly, do not expect that to lead to anything. Context is important. So it may be a bit uncomfortable, it may feel out of place, but if you are being introduced in such a lazy way within an organization to someone who might be helpful to you, start to figure out what you need and push that conversation along. That doesn't mean to badger, but this particular email, I replied to the same day to that person, said, hey, let's catch up. And even though they're situated in Hong Kong, so we would have been able to meet up face to face. That was the end of that conversation, and that was April of 2019. So you can see how this is a dead end. You found an entry point into an organization of 90,000 people. And because there was no real context, there was nowhere to take the conversation. Again, it's pushing work to someone who's already probably quite busy. And that's where you're probably going to have to make up for the lack of effort on this other person's part. Just in case, like, just so you know how bad stock photography is, the title of this stock photo is Sad African-American Millennial Guy Outcast Sit Alone Suffering from Bullying from Other People in Coffee House. Depressed man, loner, isolated from friends, having personal psychological problems. Yeah, and I'm using this as a sort of broader metaphor here. Like, stock photography tells terrible stories and it's incredibly transparent. So a big piece of advice I have to you is to get real and actually start by getting real in your imagination. All of this is very tongue-in-cheek and very, very embellished with the god-awful stock photography that I'm using. But try to imagine both of the situations I just laid out for you as they would be in real life. As I said before, Exhibit A is the digital equivalent to basically walking into my office, shouting at me, and then dropping a pile of papers on my desk to review, and then making it worse by saying, oh, I'll come back to you, right? Like, find a way, do this hard work of researching us and figuring out how you're going to work with us. We don't need that. We've got our own clients to work for, and they're always going to take priority. And Exhibit B would be like if we were at a Brinc networking mixer and Andrew walked up and said, hi, Jordan, here's founder from this startup. Okay, see you later, and walks away, right? Like, you think about, like, the reason I say play these out and get real in your head is how awkward is that first impression? And if you're doing that just in the digital sphere, it doesn't make it less awkward. And so you really want to think about how you're humanizing those interactions, or at least trying your best to inject some humanity into it. So really play out the situation in your head before you engage people. I promise.
Dan, this one doesn't work.
I promise a little bit of quality to that engagement will be much more effective than just spamming everybody with a job title in a company. So KYC, not just for fintech. Oh, before we get to that, here's another message from our old friend. Hi, Jordan, just circling back on my last message. I didn't have anything new or interesting to add from when you read before, but did not reply to me. But I know that when people badger the hell out of me, I'm much more eager to talk to them. Here's a link to my calendar, so just pick a time for the meeting you showed zero interest in having. Looking forward. P.S. I saw you're doing a webinar tonight. Maybe between now and then you can read our 130-page prospectus. Here's another attachment. Now, of course, this is all very facetious, but not far off from many messages that I have. And what I have to say is this is not just about the quality of the individual. This becomes a reflection on your very small organization, right? My impression is not of that person's name on LinkedIn. My impression is this is the company that's not trading notes about who they're speaking to. I got the same boilerplate message from their previous BD person, or I just spoke to their commercial lead yesterday. And, you know, so it's a lot of different things. And I can tell you when you every now and then when a product is worth it, when I've had good engagements, I'll try to course correct those things. And when companies are receptive to the critical feedback you're trying to give them, it really does leave a very good impression on you. An example I can give you is a company called Bling, which is a chatbot based out of Taipei. And Bling actually was in town for the Rise conference a couple of years ago. And I got 3 different messages from 2 different people, all the same message with the same copy paste, the usual routine. And none of the information in those boilerplate messages was relevant to anything that I cared about. But I was actually interested in their product from someone else that recommended it to me. And I gave them feedback. Hang on just a second, someone's knocking at my door. All right, it was the same guy trying to get me to read his PDF. No, sorry, it's my doorman, package delivery here. So the startup from Taipei messaged me with a bunch of irrelevant information. I actually pushed back to them. I said, I need to know what your product does. Here's the things that I want to know about it. They came back and they said, sorry for hitting you with a bunch of these sort of lifeless emails. Here's what we're doing. I just had my probably 40th meeting with that company about a half an hour before this, because when they course corrected and started to figure out who they were talking to and what they were trying to accomplish with us, they got a lot of traction, and we've hired them for several engagements, and I think we're about to extend that engagement. So looking at know your customer in the world of fintech and in the world of banking, that really means making sure that the people who you're looking to move or to handle their money can be trusted for a number of reasons. But what I mean in the context of B2B relationships, especially for startups, is you need to have a little more context to the conversation before you ever start it. So I lifted this little snippet from Wikipedia about the company I work for, about JLL. I encourage you to do more homework than just lifting something from Wikipedia. But it's important to kind of break down this very vague description of what our company does and help you explain how sort of subtle the differences between our different business lines can get, so that you are at least trying to get to the right people. But we'll start with that last highlighted part, ranked 179th on the Fortune 500 list. That is probably what draws 95% of the attention and cold intros that I get. The extent of their knowledge of who JLL is usually like, JLL, I've heard of them. And then usually leads to terrible first touches I talked about before, like, we've heard of you, JLL, learn about us and find a way to work with us, right? And it's not in our interest to do the heavy lifting for you. And that doesn't mean you have to come in with an intimate knowledge of our hundreds of business lines or the full extent of what real estate services company means end to end. But you should have an idea of what your ask is. Don't let your answer of what you want from us is to be a partner. That comes in way too many forms. But if it's venture capital, yeah, we do that. JLL has a venture capital fund. Do you want us to use your product or service? We use products and services. Or are you looking for help for us to help you go to market? We do that with startups as well. So knowing what you're looking for, or at least being able to have the flexibility to discuss those as 3 different options in your discussions with the people that you're meeting is going to help you get further faster when navigating the complex machines of big companies. To borrow from Alex again, a big don't in all of Know Your Customer is don't tell us our business model is dying. You may believe it, and some of us might even agree with you. If you come with a doom and gloom message, I've probably already shouted it to half of my colleagues anyway. I'm not exactly known for my optimism within the business. I'm there to help us sort of take on threats before they become just that. But it's not going to endear us to you, and it's not going to endear us to your product. We can help people like myself, people who have roles like director of innovation or partnership lead. We have within our venture capital fund, we have growth leads, and we have heads of partnerships and alliances. Those people are there to help navigate the complexity of a company like JLL, of a company that's reaching almost 100,000 people and has hundreds of business lines. So look for that. Sometimes don't look for the exact outcome you'd hope to get, but just look for some guidance, someone to help you navigate those complexities, as I said. The bigger the company, the more likely a meeting will not go well the first time. You're not going to get the result you want. I can tell you that because I had not quite the result I wanted when I first joined JLL. My first week of JLL was August of 2015. And on Wednesday afternoon, I was out to lunch with my colleagues. So I started on Monday. On Wednesday afternoon, I was out to lunch with my colleagues when I got a rejection letter from JLL saying that I was not selected for the role that I had just picked. And that was a result of our HR system rejecting an online application and I having gotten hired through connections directly to the business. I still, everything went right, but the system didn't know that I was the same Lord Reverend Michael Jordan Kostelac, Jordan Michael Kostelac, MBA. It didn't make the connection. So their first touches don't always go the right way on both a personal level and at a B2B level. But again, knowing the different ways you might want to partner, knowing beyond the word partnership, the abstraction, and having the flexibility to start those discussions, that first discussion and that second discussion are going to help you navigate those complexities. And then most important to all of this, especially in the world of technology, the people who use your product are very unlikely to be the people who will pay for your product or who will find value from your product. For instance, we manage in JLL, we manage 1.5 billion square feet across the Asia Pacific region or across 5,000 different buildings. That generates a lot of data. And the way that we want to do that is we put new ways of gathering data into the hands of our ground level staff. But we don't want the property management business to pay for it because they don't benefit from it. And a lot of times the people who are physically interacting with your product or your service might feel threatened by it. So you may think you're selling to the right people because you're making their lives easier, but if they don't derive value from it or they feel threatened by it, they're not going to be a commercial driver for your product. So that's where, again, people like myself and people like the growth leads in our venture capital funds can help you understand who your client might be, even if it's not the person who's actually pushing the buttons, metaphorically speaking. So the title trap, let's get on to that. Oh, before we get to the title track, our friend is back. Hi, Jordan. I saw you got my notes on LinkedIn, but I know how we can all lose track of those. So I called the front desk of your office and got your email. Isn't that quirky and a clear sign of how determined I am? Anyway, I'm on my way there now to tie you to a chair and make you watch this amazing promo video that we just produced. See you in a few. And again, of course, I'm making this up entirely, but it's not cute. It's not adorable to badger people. It's not effective. And if you are doing it, or if your staff is doing it, I have personally sort of blacklisted very large partners for doing exactly this same thing. It doesn't just make you, sort of irritated. It makes you want to advocate against them. It makes you want to find someone else who can do their job. But more importantly, this is, obviously this is a facetious example, but with that one partner that I just mentioned, large partner that was continuing to badger us, I found myself on several occasions writing almost like practically a cease and desist letter. Please stop emailing every person who you think might be able to give you an entry point. And again, it makes us not want to do business with you at a macro level. Now, again, if we're going to do that with an enterprise level company, chances are there's a risk that it's going to happen to you as a smaller company, and it's going to limit your chances of success, especially when we are potentially, as a large player in the space you're trying to get into, a potential barrier to entry. You want us as an advocate, as an ally, not being a thorn in our side. Anyway, getting back to the idea of a title trap. No joke, I just put the statistic together, but I've always joked around about it. Don't assume a title represents much of anything when engaging someone you don't know from a large corporate. The statistic I have on screen, I looked on LinkedIn for one particular multinational bank. 124,000 people out of just over 200,000 have the job title of vice president at this organization. So that means if the president dies, apparently 4 of the 7 people on your screen are likely to take their place? No. My job title in JLL is actually very convoluted. If you saw it on the title slide, it looks more like a line of code than a job title. But in practice, my job title, like if it was very cut and dry, is senior director. But more importantly, the nature of my work means I advise the CEO and the COO of Asia Pacific. I'm a pretty direct line, and so. Yeah, my job title may seem absurd, especially for a corporate, but you just don't know. And that's where, when you're looking to these big networks, you like LinkedIn, to see how somebody puts themselves out to the market. Are they using these platforms to engage the market and to invite conversations like the one you want to have? Then you probably do want to engage them. People in a role like mine, we put it out there that we want to talk to you. The very first line of my job title or my job description within the organization is brand ambassador. It's meant to engage a wider ecosystem and to bring the right partners in the right way. So a lot of the messaging I put out on LinkedIn, on Twitter, is about that particular engagement. But if you're just looking at the job title, you're probably not going to get anywhere because you don't understand the line of business. A lot of people can't tell you the difference between our property management and our facilities management team at JLL. And they're very similar in their execution, decidedly different in their client base. And so you may be talking to the wrong people. On the other side of that, right, when we're talking about the title trap, your title can leave a really bad impression. Things like chief disruptor, director of magic making, they're not complete turnoffs, but they can leave the impression that you do in fact take yourself too seriously. And so just as you don't want to encounter those people, you don't want to appear to be that kind of person either. And again, we know all the silly titles that I've laid out for you before. I never want, like, if you look at my LinkedIn, the MBA is buried way down at the bottom. I'm not telling you I have that because I think it's important. I'm telling you because it's really not even worth mentioning. It's not a reflection of what I'm doing and how I can be helping you. The absence or presence of an MBA next to my name or hanging on my wall doesn't change what functionally I can do to help you and your organization. And that's becoming more and more true for a lot of organizations too. But also think about what you're projecting. Does it matter that you're the CEO, that you are the chief executive officer of a team of 3? Probably not. It is not, it's so overused at this point, it's going to be meaningless. I'd rather know what you're doing in a business. So I mentioned before that I have a brewery and that I'm creative director. People know what they're dealing with me in terms of the brewery. We have a head brewer and we have an operations director, and that's it. We don't need a CEO. We make decisions in tandem. So the job title should help people navigate your organization faster as well. So don't fall into that trap is the best piece of advice I can give you. And so I'm just going to go through some really quick pro tips because, again, this was about the don'ts. I laid out the big don'ts for you. But my advice to you is be excellent to each other. I spent a year and a half living and working in Hong Kong, just firing off resumes online and stuff where I found gainful employment. My life and my career has been defined by getting out there and getting to know people. Certainly I know better than most. That's been hard for the last year or so, but even chances like this, I avail myself. Like I said, if you have a good message, if you message me on LinkedIn later, you don't need to be a sycophant. You don't need to say, hey, that was the greatest presentation I've ever seen or anything. Say, hey, this really stood out to me. Could you help me with this? I'm always eager to do that. Another big pro tip along those lines is the more senior people get, the more, not in terms of age, in terms of their stature within an organization, the more I've noticed an enthusiasm to impart knowledge. They want to leave a legacy, and part of that legacy is to help people avoid the same mistakes, just as I hope that I'm doing now. The other big pro tip, stay human. Like I said, play situations out in your mind. In the world of communications, if you study communications in college, they teach you about the sender-receiver relationship. We're always good at being the sender, especially in the world of social media, but put yourself in the receiver situation. Read an email that you're about to send as if you were getting it and ask yourself if you would take it seriously. And then on the last one here, if the answer is no, ask for help. Because I swear to you, even when JLL can't necessarily help directly, there's a couple of guys I've been working with out of Singapore. I think you guys are watching, so hey, Team Geometrid. The work that they do is incredible. It's really good. It doesn't really fit in what we actively play in. And so what I did want to do is make sure this tech and these guys get an opportunity. So I started putting them in front of my own network. Me as a representative of JLL may not be able to help, but me as someone who is well connected in the industry desperately wants to. And so that's really the next big thing. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And with that, I want to open it up for questions. So I figured that topical reference of Bill and Ted's a good place to end. So yeah, Andrew, let's see what people want to ask.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, you either can type it into the chat or you guys can unmute yourself and then ask Jordan online.
Hi, Jordan. This is Richard, and I'll just have a quick question. I think a big challenge, firstly, thank you for the presentation. Really enjoyed it, very well thought out, very entertaining. But I just have a quick question that a lot of challenges that startups face is that they don't know who to contact within, say, a big corporation that they want to be in contact with. Do you have any tips on, say, the rank or the department that these startups should reach out to these big corporations? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. And keeping in the spirit of the theme, I would say, don't aim for the C-suite for whatever you do. Like, don't aim for a CEO or the COO. My line manager is the COO of Asia. He's really attentive as a boss, but it's hard to reach him. So if you are like, imagine if it's difficult for me, a direct report, how difficult it's going to be for you, just like there's no way for you to hit the right notes for that to actually pan out the way you're hoping it will. And so first, the big don't aim for the C-suite. But the other thing, I touched on it briefly, but I'll go back to it. The people who have those sorts of roles, they're out there looking. Like we're like, it's like a scout for a sport, right? Like if I'm out looking for a prospect, I'm looking for the next big footballer, or in the old days of record labels, they used to go around and watch shows and watch these underground shows. We're doing the same things. We're out there, we're scouting. And especially right now in the digital realm, I'm putting knowledge out there, I'm attending events. So a lot of it is just having a presence and looking who is actually having a presence. So, my social media presence is about continuing this dialogue. Alex Eds, who I said inspired this conversation, his social media presence is very much in line with that too. A lot of again, you'll see names that and I know, especially in the world of PropTech and these smaller subsections of tech, you get tired of hearing from and about the same people, but that's probably your first port of call.
Thank you.
Just to add on to that, actually, I've also noticed that within, I guess, if you're reaching out to investors too, I think, which is quite relevant for some of you guys, is that when we couldn't reach out to say some managing directors, the analysts, the associates were more willing to accept my connection on LinkedIn, and then I was able to connect them through there. So I think if you guys are looking to connect with investors, you could do the same kind of similar approach.
And I would say, I gave you the advice of stay human, and I know that's a bit of an abstraction, but think about the different roles. Think about what a day-to-day for someone very senior looks like, right? Part of, I mentioned, a big part of my job is brand ambassador, but the reason my job exists is because people message the CEO and the COO, or it's really easy to put together the naming conventions plus the email addresses at most big organizations. So they get emails, but the first thing they do is send them to me, right? They say, Jordan, take a look at this, tell us if it's worth it. And on the other side of it, I think, to Andrew, your comment, there are people in organizations, especially at the junior ranks, who are eager to impress. So if you have something good and you put it in front of them, you may think you're wasting a half an hour to an hour to give them time to talk to them when they're not a decision maker, but they might become your best advocate. And honestly, that's how I ended up in this role. I wasn't doing technology before. I was doing consulting for JLL, but I kept finding stuff. I kept meeting people and saying, hey, we should check this out. And whether it was to shut me up, which they didn't do a very good job of, or whatever, they put me in this role to continue to do that as a full-time job. And more companies are recognizing the need for that brand ambassador or market outreach type of relationship, these growth leads, like I mentioned before, that we have in our venture capital fund.
Hey, Jordan, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, hey, Chris.
Yeah, I was just, you've obviously had the opportunity to do this both sort of stateside and APAC now. What major differences would you say would there be between, the regional cultural differences that you've come across?
Yeah, well, I think the first one I lightly touched on. You have to be much more nimble and empathetic when you're touching cultures from New Zealand all the way to Mauritius and everything in between, right? And so I think that's the first thing. You do have to be forgiving in that not everybody's going to be, pun intended, pitch perfect when they approach you. And I think on the other side of it, you, as a startup, don't assume that people don't understand things. I speak a fair amount of Chinese, so I've caught people saying things they probably shouldn't in the room. I also, again, don't think we don't understand what you're trying to achieve. So going back, I think the example I gave, or what Alex said, his very good advice is, don't tell us our business model is broken. Don't think we don't understand that, but part of our job is to try to poke holes in what you've got going on. But then to answer the other side of it about stateside, I mean, the challenges that are trying to be solved in the US, especially around my sector, around PropTech, tend to be very white collar challenges. And that's not as much of an issue on this side of the world. There's bigger issues to be solved, whether it's energy distribution or it's even just the safety of different buildings and the modernization of infrastructure. When I look at places like Ho Chi Minh or Kuala Lumpur, or a lot of places in Southeast Asia, they don't need to know how to visualize data. That's not so important. They need to solve traffic challenges, right? And distribution challenges within their different areas. So I hope that answers it. Maybe.
Yeah, I guess the same sort of know your audience is part of that, is it not?
I saw George has answered or asked the question, how effective is inward marketing type content, blogs, email, newsletters, inbound that is? Yeah, no, it's not as effective as you want it to be, that's for sure. It's hard for that to get through, but it's an important thing to still do. And the reason I say that is it helps you sharpen your message. Everything I just presented to you is some version of, whether it's complaints that I make on a regular basis to my colleagues or anything else like that. It's all very sharpened message. It's all been refined over time. One of the things that I've been doing, I've been working on a product within JLL for the last 2 years that I had to pitch to our senior leadership as if I was a startup. And is very well received. And one of the compliments they said at the end, you really had the answer to all the questions. And it wasn't because I was prepared, it's because I've been working on it for 2 years. So like any other muscle, it needs to be flexed. But if you're hoping that one big blog post is going to catch, or you're going to have something that goes viral, I mean, just play the lottery or something, it's going to be as effective. But if you're seeing it as a tool to sharpen your message, especially as you want to scale up and become a true executive and that CEO title to carry some real meaning, it's still very much worth doing, and something that I do all the time. Not a problem. Glad I could help. I still got time to answer some questions, and you might catch my cats in the background here, but otherwise.
I don't think, maybe anybody else have any questions? I guess not.
I don't mind. Early dinner for me then.
Perfect. So thank you, Jordan, for taking the time to host this webinar series. Any final words?
Reach out to me. Just know why you want to talk to me. I look forward to hearing from all of you, and good luck.
Yeah, I'll be sharing Jordan's, I'll be posting this video onto YouTube so that we can share it to our wider community. Everyone that registered, I will share Jordan's email so that you can have an opportunity to connect with him. And I hope to see you all at our next month's webinar. Our next one will be on, I think, April 27th with Sonali from Green Queen, who will be sharing more about SEO. So thank you, everyone, for the time, and I hope to see you guys next month. Take care.
Thank you.